Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation, while asking the question, is anything what it seems? Based on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what the podcast is all about. I also hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel so I can continue to bring you great guests like we have today. I'm your host, Doug Gardam. Today, it's a pleasure to welcome back Pastor Heath. Eric, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. So glad you could be here today. So Eric is a father of four. He's the husband of one. And he's the pastor at Northview Community Church's Central Abbotsford campus. The last time he was here, back in episode 65, you were the new pastor at that point in time. But we don't use that adjective anymore because he's the pastor and he's been here a long time. So welcome, Eric. It's great to have you here.
Good to be here.
So starting today, Eric, what makes Eric very intriguing to me is, and we talked a lot about this in the first podcast, is you are a lawyer.
Was a lawyer, yes.
Was a lawyer.
Trained as a lawyer, yes.
And became a pastor.
Yeah.
I was very intrigued by that. We spent most of the podcast talking about that. This time we won't do that, although it will come up. But the second thing that kind of came up this time is you're one of the very few people that have requested to be on the podcast. I might be the only one that's been on and requested to come on again.
Okay, well.
Now, why this is kind of significant to me is I think of the title of the podcast, Better Than Not. And it starts to, it's better to do something than not to do something. That's, to me, almost a motto for life for many. Coming from your world previously, in the lawyer world, coming into pastor world, that's kind of a better than not kind of scenario in a way. But the question that I'm starting with, and we're kind of going to get right into it today, but how often does a fear or things get into a person's life or mind that they don't go and say, whenever you want, I'll come back on your podcast, as an example, because it's very rare to me. And you're in a world now that you see that probably a lot. So how do you kind of see that? Because it's I think it's I go to Frodo and Gandalf and says, it gets pretty scary, Frodo, when you cross that front doorstep of your house into the world, right?
Yeah.
But how many of us, and I think it fits in right into our world, our godly world, our world of having faith even, right? So how do you see that?
I mean, I think it could just be that as someone who has practiced law for 10 years and has now been preaching for the last 5 or 6, that maybe I just like talking a lot. And so this is another opportunity for that.
Well,
maybe I like talking more than most. I don't know. That was never a part of my personality growing up, but in terms
you found it.
In terms of a changing frame of reference, I think
yes.
that certainly has happened over my life as I have just been through different experiences and again had the training in those two areas, and then a little bit of experience in both of those two professions, for lack of a better word, has, I think, maybe pushed me to the idea that I just enjoy having conversations about stuff, and I have found in our conversations outside of this framework, because we do see each other somewhat frequently at this point, that a good conversation, I think, is something that is it's worthy to have for the sake of the people involved in it. And if other people can evendrap in, then maybe that's helpful too. Hopefully that's helpful.
It is a kind of cool thing.
Yeah,
for sure. So when you because it was one night and you just kind of says anytime you're ready to go, I'm ready to do another podcast. What you liked the conversation? What prompted you to even ask me?
I mean, I think I just I've enjoyed our conversations, the ones that
Yeah.
we have oftentimes. So for the benefit of everyone that is paying attention to this, we will regularly see each other twice a week.
Yes.
Saturday nights at church and then Wednesday nights at our men's Bible study, and often have a chance to connect and just chat about what's going on in our lives. Usually more, I mean, less in depth than you would kind of sitting down for an hour, because usually it's 2 to 5 minutes of just catching up. But I've enjoyed your perspective and hearing things. I mean, one of the things I think I said to you in one of our conversations is I had a conversation with another person who works at Northview a while ago, and he told me that he had been described as the most interested person in the world. So if you go back to, there was those beer commercials from 15-20 years ago for Dos Equis, where it was the most interesting man in the world. And he said that his friends called him the most interested man in the world. And I think you give him a run for his money in terms of being interested. And so just the willingness to engage in conversation, to dig into different areas of other people's interests is, so I guess what I'm saying is I like to talk about myself, and you give me a good opportunity to do that.
That's very cool. It's interesting how you start to discover things about what you do and what you don't, because it's something that I've always liked people, but I just never knew that conversation part. So before we go forward, Eric mentioned the Bible study.
Yeah.
So you were instrumental for me, kind of elevating my game, so to speak, because so it was really interesting how it kind of came about, because a couple people had asked me. I've been attending this Bible study. I've mentioned it numerous times in the podcast because I'm just fascinated by what it has brought about. Last night was Bible study again, no doubt. It's just a crazy thing. And I was kind of wondering, like, where will it go? But the idea of, as example, leading a table had just never, like, I'm not doing that. Like, there's all kinds of people that are very, very capable. And then Eric, one day you kind of in coffee said, I've just told someone else I would not do it, like literally days before. And you go, like, would you consider being a table leader? And of course, I knew the answer right away, but I hadn't kind of reflected. But since that time, so we've been into this massive study of the whole Bible. But last night we finished the Old Testament, and which is pretty much the fall, right? In the early spring. It started in September, right?
Yeah, we started mid-September.
Which is kind of a massive thing when you just think about it for a second. But that has significantly changed my thought and how I think, and working with individuals around that. And I thank you for that, because that was something that was not even on any list of mine of things that I wanted to do.
Oh, I'm glad that it's been enjoyable for you. I mean, there were two factors going into it. One is that it's easy to think that in a large church like Northview, where in the big scheme of things we have 4,000 or 5,000 people that come in each week, that someone who is in a place of leadership, like a Bible study table discussion is, they must need to be an expert in some sense. They need to be, had to gone and be educated in whatever, go to Bible school, do all these things that I never did before the last 5 or 6 years.
Yes.
And I think that there is so much. I mean, one of the beauties of studying the scripture is that it is accessible to everyone. That studying the Bible is and should be accessible to everyone. I think we, again, in North American culture, we kind of put this expertise layer on things and think, oh, like in order for me to actually know anything about this, I've got to somehow do the groundwork. I'm like, no, this is the work you're doing right here. It's open to everyone. And the skills that go into a good leader in that sense, I mean, certainly we want to have people that have good character, that are not going to reflect poorly on the church or reflect poorly on Christ, reflect poorly on believers, but also are people that are willing to do the work of actually studying it so that you come prepared, but then also to engage the people around the table. And I think that's even more important for men. So, I mean, you introduced me as the Central Abbotsford campus pastor, but as you have intimated, I also oversee our men's Bible study. It's kind of the second part of my role. And one of the challenges in leading a group of men, specifically in our context, is that they, in a Bible study context, oftentimes there's just there is that hesitancy. Again, I don't know if it's a hesitancy or if you talked about, I mean, fears of talking. Like, I don't know if it's a fear of just appearing like you don't know what you think you should know, or what it is. But a lot of guys do have, I think, an amount of insecurity about this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting in the context of Northview, we have 3 separate women's Bible studies that are each in and of themselves larger than our one men's Bible study. Now we still have 200 guys that come out to men's Bible study, so that's great, and we give thanks for that. But for some reason, there's something going on, and I don't think it can be explained away just by the fact that generally speaking, in the Northview culture, men will work more than women do. I mean, I think that's part of it, just in terms of the availability, but also it's not the only reason. There's some other factor that's going on there, and I do think that there's an aspect of insecurity that lies below that. And so to have men that are able to facilitate conversation, and you'll probably have experienced this when you're around the table and you have some guys that come and they are as prepared or more prepared than you are.
Yes.
And then there are other guys who are coming and you know that they haven't opened up that workbook or the Bible over the course of the week since last Wednesday. And so being able to navigate that and draw people into those conversations, recognizing that you're kind of meeting them where they're at, is a skill that is something that a leader of a Bible study discussion needs to have. And again, with my conversations with you, you seem to fit that bill. So I was more than happy to invite you into that role, just like I was to invite myself back here.
Well, I was going to say, I had not an anticipation what it was going to be like. Part of what I like is that you've got to think about where you're going to go, like what you're going to figure out. And I have lots of different interests that fall into that. So each week you have kind of a different thing. And then you have a message, like last night's message, that kind of takes another part of that study as a whole. So I was kind of intrigued by it, but it kind of brought me back, because you were talking about men, and I think this is a big part and an issue that we have, and that is that whole sense of rejection and that fear of that rejection. Like, you go back to your teenage years and asking out that girl, and it's like it's come out more probably in the last number of years of recognition that that's tough. Like, and that's your first one, right? And how you start to kind of go through. And I think that same, I would call it primal in a way, has it throughout our lives. We're supposed to know. As the man, we're supposed to know. For some reason or other, we take that on, right? So whether it's in the Bible study, whether you're in the office, the corporate world, I spent a lot of time studying in the corporate office. To say I don't know is just about, like, you might as well put your resignation in a way, right? You just can't say that. And yet, how many things get misdirected because someone didn't actually stand up and say, I don't know?
Yeah. I mean, it's daunting to consider the possibility of failure. And yet, the more that I have dived into the study of the scriptures, you recognize that, I mean, even this year in a Bible study where we are going through the whole storyline of scripture, that the story is one of redemption. The arc of the scriptures is a redemptive story arc, which is one that I think should hopefully give guys maybe not comfort with failure, but at least a framework in which to understand, hey, not that it's necessarily okay that I'm going to screw up, and I don't desire to do it, but also there is abundant grace that is there. And so recognizing something about our own finiteness, because and again, there is maybe a bit of a prideful aspect for men in particular that goes on, that we want to be able to do it all. And if it's something that I can't do well, I'm not even going to do. Yeah. Not recognizing, of course, that, or maybe not acknowledging, and maybe this is something that gets harder as you get older, that the way to get good at something is to actually do it and try it. As a kid, you kind of instinctively understand that, even if, you may push against, doing piano lessons or sports practice or whatever, because it's still hard work. But you kind of, whether you get forced into it as a kid, and I mean, as you introduced me, I'm a father of 4. I've got kids that I'm walking through different lessons and sports and different things at this point. You have to reiterate to them, it's like, yeah, you're not going to do everything well on the first try. There are very few people that are those
those gifts.
Just, those absolutely, 1 in a billion naturally talented individuals. And even then, those people still have to work hard. I mean, Serena Williams didn't become the best tennis player in the world solely because she had the most talent. She probably did have the most talent, but she also had to work at it because there's a lot of other almost as talented people that could work twice as hard and get there. And
it's very true.
Yeah. And so I think then that fear again of failure, like maybe it does magnify as you get older, and maybe it's just because the demands of life get so much that you only have so much space to do certain things, and it becomes a question of priority. But if you are a Christian, if you believe that the Bible is something that shares with you all you need for life and godliness, that it is how God has revealed himself to his people, then the challenge that I have to a lot of guys is, should this not be higher up your priority list? Not to say that there's not other things you can't do or be interested in, but it's a constant challenge that I try to piece together. How do I challenge guys without burdening them? But also,
even more. Yeah, actually, that's true.
But recognizing that there is also value to it at the end of the day, because all of us are making priority decisions in what we spend our time on and with.
It's so interesting. This came up in another conversation I had, and they were talking about a company that they were working for. And the way that the organization was set up is they would tell you, what are you going to plan for the next quarter? What are your plans to do? And they said, when you had the next round of reviews, you could say you went and did this and it failed and be okay. But if you said, I didn't get to it, that was the worst thing you could say.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going like, how do you change that sentimentality? Because that's kind of like what we're. And if the Old Testament isn't a great story of, in many ways, failure, like just going over, like probably the number one thing I heard on my table is, I can't believe they don't get it. And it's kind of like, well, do we like, we're in 2026.
Yeah.
What have we done better? In many ways, right? It's a great introspective, but somehow or other, that doesn't always get through, right? We reflected on a judgment. Like even last night, we're in Nehemiah, and we were talking about the different things that were being done to put the wall back up, right? And it was like, how can we not get this?
Yeah, and there is something in the human condition, the fallen human condition. One of the benefits of the training that I've had in the past number of years, or in doing my seminary degree, was learning the Simeon Trust process for preparing a sermon. So it's basically a Bible study methodology, a way to dive into a particular text. And there's nothing that is, ordained divinely by this process, but it is one that just is a good method for walking through a biblical text. And how we have kind of modified that process at Northview is we've introduced a concept that is brought by that was introduced by a scholar named Brian Chappell, called the fallen condition focus. Basically, that every biblical text has a fallen condition focus. It identifies at some point some aspect of life under the fall, whether that's sin, whether that is pain and hurt that's caused by the effects of living in a fallen world, whether that's grief. There's something in there that is identified in each portion of text as to what the problem is. And then you can go through the text and see how the text applies the gospel framework to provide the solution for that particular problem. And that's been really helpful in certainly in helping me learn how to preach a sermon, but also in terms of studying the scriptures in a pastoral lens and recognizing that yeah, I mean, there is this book here that has a lot of words on it, and it's good to know the information about that. But at the end of the day, if I'm called to be a pastor, where I'm caring for the needs and the spiritual well-being of the couple hundred people that attend at Central Abbotsford, then I also need to have some insight into what the conditions of the heart and the conditions of this world are that are going to impact people in some way,
Right.
and that are going to lead them potentially into a situation where they're facing something and they don't know where to go, and they don't even understand why things aren't working out the way that they hope to be.
Right. Right.
And so I think we see that. I mean, you see that explicitly in walking through the narrative of the Old Testament that we've been doing, because it is kind of hit over our head in a number of different ways. The different ways where Israel falls short, whether that's making promises that they can't keep, whether that is, as we saw this week, trying to essentially rebuild the utopia in Jerusalem by starting off by getting those walls up to keep all the bad forces out, not recognizing that the bad forces lie within.
It's amazing.
It is, and it is, and not recognizing also that the bad forces are not necessarily individuals; they are the heart that is within the individual. The line between good and evil goes straight through the human heart, and that is something that we, as humans, I think we carry that forward today, because whatever our theological doctrinal understanding is about the nature of the human heart, I still think most people think of themselves as generally good people.
Yes,
and that includes people that would take kind of a fairly heavily reformed theology or doctrine to say, no, like total depravity is something that exists, like that the human heart is nothing but evil. But when I live that out on my day-to-day basis, I'm still pretty much a generally good guy. And then we get surprised when we get pressed in situations and don't act in those good ways, or things don't work out the way that we think they should have.
It's interesting you bring that up. You like, when I talk with you, there's just so many things that flash through my mind. I'm going to try and keep them orderly, though. But when you said that, for years, I can remember in the background, and this kind of came from Brené Brown. She said something that, because it had changed for her. She says, I think basically everyone's trying to do their best. And it's kind of to your point about being good. I'm kind of to that belief now, too. But when I watch and look and that judgmental part comes out, you're going like, how are you trying to do your best? And you're doing this.
Yeah.
But what you don't have is all of the circumstances that have led to that. And this is all I've got left. And I was fascinated by that, to me, is that overcoming, because it really shifted how I look at the world.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm in the heat of a discussion sometimes, I don't necessarily understand that, or you see it on a news clip or whatever, but it's like, but they're still trying to do their best, Doug. Like, how does that work? It kind of got me stopping honking my horn at people, as an example. Because, you've cut people off, Doug. You've turned right without your signal on.
Yeah.
You've stopped in a road without telling anybody, with cars behind you, not on the 401 or the highway. I'm speaking of Ontario here, but Highway 1. But you've done all these things.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's exactly to what you're saying. So with that comment, I'm going to switch back, because you mentioned about sermons. And I said to you the other day about, I forget who was speaking, because we have such a bench of pastors. But I said about preparing sermon. And you said, well, I don't actually complete my sermon until I've looked at John Piper. I haven't read a lot of John Piper, by the way. Tim Keller, and you said Spurgeon.
Yeah.
And I told you, and this is a bit of a long one, but I was going to say, I've just started reading Knowing God by J.I. Packer.
Yeah.
Which is the more I learn, the more slower I read. But it starts with Spurgeon in 1855. He's 20 years old, I think. And he says, studying the Bible is not only humbling, it's expanding and consolatory. And you kind of go like, how can you be humbling and expanding at the same time? And when you said that to me, it just kind of going, okay, so this is all that goes into Eric's. message each time you kind of go through. Walk through that for me. Like, how does that kind of work for you?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of our sermon preparation process, I mean, you mentioned the deep bench of preachers that we have at Northview, which is a blessing because inevitably in a week where I'm preaching, there's at least 2 or 3 other guys that are going to be preaching at various campuses. So that means that in the week of our sermon, we have on the Wednesday a time where we all get together and talk about the work that we have done and sort of understanding what the passage has to say at that point. Not necessarily what we're going to say, but what the passage is teaching us, what the main thrust, the big idea of the particular passage is.
That's one of my secret wishes, is to be a fly on the wall in one of those meetings.
Because
I can only imagine what you discuss.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's perhaps most interesting whenever we've got some slightly different perspectives on it. Sometimes it's pretty plain and obvious, and so we kind of all come to the same or broadly the same conclusion as to what's being talked about. But the part that you were talking about, the prep work where I'm going through other authors, I generally will do that before that process because I recognize, I think that I can I've been studying. I have some tools at my disposal that will allow me to be able to read through the scriptures and understand what something says. And yet I don't want to just rely on my own understanding. One of the beauties of the of preparing a sermon about studying the Bible is that we have 2,000 years of church history of people that have much smarter people than me have gone through these things from different perspectives and different eras and different places in the world and different circumstances. And they have studied these texts. And so it will help me to some degree make sure that I'm on the right track. Like if I read through this and 3 or 4 preachers who I have high esteem for have kind of come to the same landing point than I have, then I can kind of wipe my brow and think, okay, it seems like I'm on the right track here. And of course, there are commentaries. We have, over the years, many different scholars, preachers have written various commentaries about every book of the Bible. So that does help kind of go in, and especially for getting some context pieces that you may miss if you aren't as familiar on the back of your hand as to what the social situation in first century Corinth was. That is something that certainly people that have done that work before, you can stand on the shoulders of those giants to help you prepare in that. But so generally the prep work that I do is obviously reading and studying the text on my own, kind of going through it, like what are the phrases, what are the turns of phrase, what are the keywords that are being used in here that are going to give me some insight into what it is that the author is talking about in that original context, and what it is, again, going back to that fallen condition focus that he is getting at. And that's why I think sometimes too, reading other pastors, other preachers that have delivered sermons on the same passage is helpful to me, because you can see what it was they are trying to bring some correction to in their particular setting. Right. So it's in part it is, what does the text say, and in part then it is what fallen condition, what aspect of sin or evil or selfishness or whatever aspect is there that those pastors were trying to preach to in their setting. And that's something that can help me round out not only what I think the text says, but what it's addressing, and can kind of guide me in terms of how I'm going to present that in the context of a local church setting. I mean, the challenge with that, and this is one I was thinking about this yesterday in the context of Nehemiah, because for those not familiar with the story, Nehemiah is a leader in Israel. He comes back. He sees that, this is after they have been exiled from Babylon, but they're starting to trickle back into town, and Jerusalem is just kind of a shadow of what it once was. Everyone has these memories, whether it's individual or institutional memories of the glory days, the times gone by when it was at its peak, when the temple was there and the cloud of God's glory was visiting the temple. And none of that's happening at this point. And he's basically trying to I think he's earnestly seeking God's command in how to bring it back to that point, but kind of working through what that looks like. And so he, I think, is seeking to be obedient. They build the walls back up. It seems like things should be going great. And then he comes back into town and looks, and kind of everything is the way that it always was. And he seems to kind of, lose his mind a little bit. And he's really upset by this.
Yeah. He's human.
He's human. And that's the thing, is that so is a pastor that is preaching a message. I mean, one of the challenges anytime that I deliver a message is that I recognize I have to be preaching to myself as well too, because just because I'm the guy that's up on the stage reading what I have written or proclaiming something out of the scriptures doesn't mean that I've got this all figured out at this point. In fact, probably some of the times that I have got and feedback is always a weird thing as a preacher, but some of the times that I've got the most meaningful feedback have been in the sermons that have impacted me the most, where I have been like, okay, this is something that I needed to hear because it's actually correcting like a judgmental attitude in my own heart, or it's checking me on something that maybe I thought I had better control of.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so there is always that tension when you go up to deliver a message that is to some degree calling people to a higher moral and ethical standard, which is not the entirety certainly of what the gospel message is. There's much more than that, but there is an aspect of it that is an ethical call, recognizing that I fall short of this, that this is not, I mean, and to me that is one of the beauties of being able to preach in an expository fashion, where I'm taking a text from the scriptures and conveying what it says and what through study it has to say for the people of Central Abbotsford, is at least this isn't my idea. Like I'm not going up there saying, hey, this is my TED talk about what I think is going to solve the world. No, I'm just trying to essentially interpret and translate what the Lord of the universe, in fact, says, no, this is actually what you need to hear. And so there is, to some degree, there is a safety net there for the preacher, because if I'm doing my job well, you're not going to hear a whole lot of error. You'll get certainly there's bits of it that's in there because we are individuals, we have our personalities, we bring our different, areas of interest, senses of humor, whatever you have to the way that we will deliver and speak. But also my goal is that this is not my message that I am delivering.
No, and to me, it's very evident in that. That's what I like about Northview a lot, and we hear you a lot now, in the sense that you're not afraid to speak about things that you know are not going to necessarily be well received. Like we've talked recently about the prosperity gospel as an example, right? And I'm taking this history. Well, you're the one that kind of directed me there too, of Christianity, and just how you can even see as the, I'll call it the world moved across from Europe into Americas, and how it started to shift. That kind of linked to the American dream.
Yeah,
and we like to hear that, right? We like the whole concept of, if I do good things will happen to me. If I work hard, I will be successful. And we like, it appeals to us, but if we think about it for very long, it's not very accurate. And it's surprising to me that it's kind of like that. So it's interesting when you say how you kind of go through that, because I think it's an interesting picture that you're shedding an interpretation, but not necessarily redirecting something on how you think the world should be run. And people love to do that.
Yeah, and the prosperity gospel is an interesting thing too, because it really isn't a new idea. It's certainly got a new manifestation of it in the concept of North America in the 20th and 21st centuries. But it is, I mean, one of the questions that gets asked repeatedly in the Psalms is, why do the wicked prosper? And the implicit question behind that is, well, why aren't the people that are doing good getting good things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you go back to the book of Job, where Job's friends are basically saying, hey, the reason that these bad things are happening to you is clearly because you've done something wrong. Because if you were doing everything right, then you wouldn't have bad things happen to you. And so it, as Ecclesiastes says, there is nothing new under the sun, truly.
It's stunning.
But we also can find ways as individuals and as societies to just apply these things in different ways.
Well, the other part, I think, it kind of falls into the cult of personality of our own society, right? We just kind of associate these things with individuals, and it finds its way into like messages and into preaching, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like, and now this is one of the reasons why, and I've repeated this a few times, but I liked hearing prior to a sermon the idea that it's not what the pastor's saying to you, it's what God's saying through the pastor to you. And when you hear that, to me, it shifts my thinking, right? Because it's not like the outside world, right? It's like, like you get a famous actor and they're great at doing their craft, amazing, but suddenly they know everything about politics, or they know everything about whatever incident, and this person says this, so it must be right. And it's kind of stunning how quickly we fall into that's how it works.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very easy for us to, I think, sublimate the concepts of truth and the messenger of the truth in the sense that we often, I mean, and this even goes back to your asking me about the different pastors that I will read, because I read them because I have built up an esteem for them. And I think that they have thought well through the scriptures. They certainly studied the scriptures in greater detail over the course of their lifespan than I have. But also I recognize that they are also fallible human beings.
Right.
And so I think that like our measure of the truth is always as against the truth itself and not the person who is delivering the information.
Right.
And again, conversely, I think we as a society will flip that around the other way.
Yes.
In the sense that we will also, if there's someone that I really don't like for whatever reason, I've disagreed with them on a political stance, I've just disagreed with them theologically, disagreed with them in some other sense, then what they are saying must be wrong. And again, I think that's the same error just made in a different way, that instead of measuring something by the truth, you measure it by the messenger. Now, I mean, they may well have proven themselves to be wrong on a lot of things, and so I will take something that they say with a grain of salt or measure it against something else. But I think the biggest question that we need to ask ourselves, and this is like, what is our measure? What is our plumb line? What are we actually lining up these truth claims against?
Right.
And so, I mean, back to the point then is that the beauty for me of the scriptures is that we actually have now we have an objective measure. There is a meaning behind what the scripture says. We of course still try to work out what that is, and you can kind of get into these different meta questions about the interpretations of the scripture and how we actually ascertain that line. But in most cases, it is, I think, quite clear. And so because of that, then that gives a foundation from which I then can seek to proclaim those truths from. Again, not because I'm anything special, not because my hope in this is, everyone thinks that, anything Eric says is gold. No, I mean, I want to be discipling people into being critical thinkers about what I say, even. Like, certainly I'm coming to this in good faith. And to your earlier point, I'm trying the best that I can when I am, when I'm preaching a sermon, but undoubtedly I have said things that are wrong. And I have been challenged on things that I've said before by people in good faith, not coming up to me and, you said this, but actually perhaps sharing a different perspective or getting me to think about a thing in a way that I just hadn't yet at some point. Which again is one of the beauties of being able to be a pastor in a local church setting, is that just by having had conversations with 150, 200 different people over the past year and a half that I've been serving at Central Abbotsford, it does broaden my perspective beyond myself. And I think that, again, you can do that certainly in a number of ways. People do that through reading. You see different perspectives in reading, whether that's nonfiction or fiction. But I don't think you can actually beat, especially if you are to be communicating to those same people about the things that they are experiencing in the world. You can't actually be talking to them and just sharing a bit of their lives to know how to do that well.
I can't agree with you more on that one. I think that's part of this whole long format podcast has really brought that to my attention, is that you just, there's something that happens between us when you're talking to another individual. And I found it because I've spent a lot of time writing as well. So it's like, and it's very difficult to capture what you're thinking to tell someone else in words in writing. You know that even as from your background, how difficult that is. And most of us don't spend nearly enough time at even kind of learning that craft.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why texts get so, or emails get so, like people get so upset by them. And when you're in front of a person, there's even a vibe that goes on, like that Malcolm Gladwell said that in one of like Blink or one of his books, where there's things we pick up that we're not even aware we're picking up.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me. Like that's like that.
What I mean, and even going back to your comment earlier about driving and people cutting you off, like when you're in a conversation with someone, I think you get more opportunity to understand the motivation behind what the other person is saying. The heart behind like when you're driving in a car, someone cut me off. Well, the reason they cut me off is because they're a jerk. That's the only conclusion that I can draw. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's not because they've got 3 screaming kids in the back seat and they were distracted by that and work is busy and there's, the rent is late this month. It's because they're a jerk.
Yep.
But when I'm having a conversation with you, like even if one of us were to say something that the other person gets caught off guard by and thinks like, oh, that really sounds kind of a bit strange, we then have the opportunity to go back and forth on that, to understand maybe what the nuance was. Whereas, again, you talk about a digital correspondence, or even, and probably, social media is the worst example of this, because not only do you have the possibility of miscommunication that is accidental, you also have an incentivized structure of being very provocative in putting a statement forth that can very easily and intentionally be interpreted in a number of different ways so as to generate engagement. Because at the end of the day, engagement is what drives the online economy.
And it's interesting. It kind of comes back to that whole thing even in the entertainment world, right? Bad publicity is as good as good publicity. It's the no publicity that's the problem.
Yeah.
So you can intentionally mislead in order to get that attention, right?
For sure.
It's exactly. And this isn't just controlled by the media, traditional media empires. We all have it in our hands, in our phones, that we can go and immediately do. So if we want to be someone else, we can say whatever. Like it's very confusing to me. I want to go back to the sermon part. And this is around something that's been very revealing to me. So you have a law background, I have an engineering background. And I had recently listened to Tim Keller's, I think it's called Splitness. It was really related because it's around Romans in the New Testament. And I sent it out to a table because I said, this will give you a sense to give the Israelites a little bit of a break for what they're doing. But in it, he said, I believe because I was chosen.
Yeah.
And that was like, it's funny how you just hear things. Sometimes they just pop out like in bright lights for you. And I was really intrigued by it because our world kind of thinks that, like, I believe because I choose to believe. It's all about me. It's not out of that control. So it's really like, I wouldn't be believing if God hadn't chosen me to believe, right? So you put that in together. So then I go back to my science world, Eric, and I say, okay, so that does kind of fit with, I had nothing to do with coming into this world.
Yeah.
Because it's the kind of, like, I was chosen to come into this world when I did in this country to these parents that I had nothing to do with, right? And it really started to kind of ring to me almost how that's missed in our world, because we're around like, let's put the 10 commandments up on the wall and we're going to follow them. And what we've learned in the Old Testament is we commit to things that we can't possibly live up to.
Yeah.
And the 10 commandments, many might hear this and say, like, Doug, that's just wrong. But we're gonna live to the 10 commandments, and that's how I'm going to get into heaven, and God's going to love me. And I had that, I think, for most of my life.
Yeah.
That's why I Bible study again, Galatians 2:16. I repeat this over and over again because I think it's very powerful. And we're justified through faith in Christ and not through works of the law. Because I find it just an absolutely profound statement that really switched how I looked at it. And then I hear Tim Keller say it again in other words.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sort of anthropological and theological heart of the matter is one of asking the question, who is the center of the universe? Because I think in modernity, certainly in the last 500 years post-Renaissance, the center of the universe is very clearly the individual. It is me. I'm the only one that can experience my life. And so, which is not to say that the offshoot or the downstream effects of that is necessarily kind of an unbridled selfishness, but that I am the primary lens in which experience, in which reality can be moderated and experienced. And so then you of course get into a post-modernity aspect of that where we now then apply that lens to questions that were once considered objective, like morality, right and wrong. These things that in the modern world we kind of had moved from a perspective of, well, okay, there are right and wrong objective things that exist outside of humanity. Well, now we have taken that over into our own lens. But the shift in that, of course, comes from a pre-modern mindset, the one in which the scriptures were written and really kind of govern most of humanity, at least in the West. I can't speak to areas outside of the kind of historical basis that I've looked at it, but that God was the center, that our experience, my individual existence on the earth was secondary to the existence of the God of the universe. It was derivative of him. And I think that we have in the West, because of philosophical changes that have had a lot of different effects, one of them has been that shifting perspective that puts the individual as the center. Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am.
Yes.
The I am comes from like that is a entirely self-referential statement of existence, that my existence is only dependent, my cognition, my the basis of my consciousness is my own mental ability and my own perspective on the world. And that very much, I think, is a radical shift that we see, though. And that comes out even into this question of choice, right, that you were talking about, that as we all reflect on it, we had very little influence in the question as to whether we were going to be born and exist on this world or not. Regardless of what our perspective is at this point, we really didn't have a whole lot to do with that. And so it does invite the question of why and then who.
Well, as I have this conversation, I'm thinking back to what I mentioned about Spurgeon and him saying this in 1855, where he goes, the Bible is not only humbling, but it's expanding and consolatory.
Yeah.
So when you kind of go like, how do you be humbled and expanded at the same time? But it makes me think of the idea you're humbled by what you just said, the God of the universe. So you've got this cosmos that's beyond measurable, right? Like come back and say it's 41 billion years or whatever it is. We also know that it's infinitely small. So it goes the completely the other way. And we keep making things up thinking we're getting there. So we have this immense thing, which is pretty humbling when you think of our little dot, the earth, and me in this little room here. It's enormously humbling. But then we think of this gift we've been given of this brain that has an infinite capacity within our skull to go from consciousness into unconsciousness, to think of things that are just staggering, which is expanding. It's kind of like, how do those two, it's a paradox, in other words, right? And then it brings in our whole sense of, well, when I say consolatory, that's probably the heart, right? Like as far as like how we feel, because to me at our basic level, we're a feelings emotional being. Like we want to deny that. As an engineer science world, I want to say I make my own decisions. I make decisions based on calculations and all that stuff. But in the end, when I've done all that work, I feel like I did the right thing to get there. I feel I did, right? And it's like that's all bundled into this massive text that was written well over 2,000 years ago.
Yep.
And we get a chance to kind of partake of that. And you begin to say, like, wow, well, there's times that I kind of go, like, what could I be doing that's better than this?
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think to kind of take those concepts of expanding and humbling is that I think as the more that I've read through the scriptures, it has expanded my perspective on who God is. So it has, and again, you kind of use that example of the cosmos. Like you sort of think about yourself, if you ever have been able to stand out in an open field on a beautiful summer starlit night where there's no clouds in the sky, and you can kind of look out into the vastness of the universe and see all these stars out there. And there is something that is so expansive about that, because you look out and you kind of think that like that little dot of light is, how many trillions of miles away from me, and yet that light is hitting me here. And then also you recognize to some degree your own finitude in the context of this vast infinity, that when you look up on a summer sky, you can only see, like, I'm only seeing 0.0000 whatever percent of
crazy
of how much is out there. And so as I've gone through the scriptures, I mean, I see that more in how I have, I think, grown in my understanding of who God is. And by that, I don't mean that like I just have gained a more accurate understanding of who he is because he has grown in my estimation of him, which also I think then has the effect of humbling me, because it, at least in my moments when I'm viewing things most accurately, really reveals to me just how little I can actually do on my own. And again, like we like to think we're pretty good people and we're doing our best, and yet I can go through all the moments in my, not even in my life, like in the last month, that I can look at and think, oh boy, there was a time when I was, I was just in a zone right then when I really selfishly wanted something, and some distraction came into my life, usually one of my children, and I reacted poorly to that because I had a set idea that like I was the Lord of my life right in that moment, and someone was coming, one of my subjects was coming in to annoy the king, and I didn't really want that happening at that point. And I think, okay, there's in fact if I think that this life is a means by which I am to sort of measure myself against an objective standard, I got a long way to go.
Well, it's funny that you bring this up, because this morning in my walk, with lots of things that I do with the podcast, there's a lot of promotion, a lot of things that you're trying to do. And social media is just switched. There's so much AI between the TikTok and the YouTube and the Instagram and all that. But this thing popped up the other day that said, remember when you had a plan? And I thought, that almost captures the spirit of some of how I feel. Because there's that statement that I think John Cleese used to say is, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And it starts to fit together now. Like I'm amazed, Eric, of how much, right to what you're saying, I appear to have control of. It's just astounding to me. And when you become aware of it, it almost gets to the point where the day's going to be full, got lots of things to do. You ask me what my plan is, and I kind of feel like I'm just doing my best to follow what God's design for me is. Like, I don't know how else to answer it, because it's like, I feel like I have so little control on it now.
When I was going through the process of applying for the position that I currently have now 2 years ago, one of the questions at one of the interviews, the sort of classic job interview question of where do you see yourself in 5 years, was posed to me.
Absolutely.
And so I reflected on it, because at the time I was 43 years old, and I said, being asked this question at 43 is a lot different than being asked this question at 18 for a number of reasons, Absolutely. Of course. Yep. But also I said, if you kind of took me back on 5-year chunks in my life and asked the question to me at 18, where do you think you'll be at 23, at 23, at 28, and so on and so forth, I think I'd probably have about a 40% success rate, like in terms of guessing where I would be.
Yes.
Now, maybe that's unique to me. I have had, a few different paths in my life that one has kind of led to another, that's led to another, with upending from the Lord in terms of calls on my life in that time.
Yeah.
But it does reveal to me how as someone who is, I'm not I'm not a type A personality. I'm not the most kind of gear down into having a plan, but also I'm not aimless either. And yet, even in that context of someone that's probably, reasonably well resourced to plan out his life, still, my batting average is probably, it's not bad, but it's not getting me to the Hall of Fame.
Well, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't have plans. I think you need to have some kind of I'll say direction, for that lack of a better term. But I'm sure I read this in a book years ago. It's a business book. And I think it was MacArthur that said it, all plans end when the first soldier sets foot on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And that was really one of the first times I started to think, yeah, the to-do list that I write out every day, and I get to one or two of them, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm very diligent to do it. It's like, maybe there's something to that. Like, maybe that's not kind of how it works.
The modern twist on that is the Mike Tyson quote that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
That's a good one too. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about today, because we're not going to go back through your lawyer world and your pastoral world, because you did a great job of articulating that, and I highly recommend people going back to listen to that, because you have a great story of how that came together. But one of the things that seems to be popping up, I know I haven't heard almost nothing of this over the last number of weeks, but in Canada, we have this bill apparently that's going through Parliament on C9. And I'll get you to explain it. But part of my question is around this idea of going back, and I'm going to say 5 years, but I'm probably way off. And I think it was Bill C-16. And it was around being kind of legislated to call a person by their pronouns. This makes me laugh a little bit because I think of our monthly put your name tag on.
Yeah.
And like how important just a person's name is by and large to them, right? When you hear someone call Eric rather than, hey guy, like there's something that goes through us, right? I love people saying, Doug, this is what I'm really thinking, right? You're recognized or whatever. But when Jordan Peterson really got I'll say famous for disagreeing with this because he saw it as cutting into freedom of speech. I don't want to be legislated into what I have to call someone, right?
Yeah.
But not thinking that, like, I'll call you what you want to be called. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't want it to be made legal, as an example.
Yeah.
That bill passed. Like, he fought it tooth and nail. I mean, and that's going back for years. I have this in my head when I think of C9.
Yeah.
So what I thought would be great to kind of go through today, because you're almost like in a sense, a legal advisor for I think Northview, if I'm not mistaken.
Reluctantly. I don't give any advice, though. I can't give legal advice legally anymore. No longer licensed.
Which is fair, and that's not what we're really looking for. But I think it really does help people because we get excited very easily about stuff.
Yeah.
And it bothers me because, and then sometimes we don't get excited about stuff that we should get excited about. Yeah. I think go back to like 1930s Germany as an example. So I thought, while I've got you here, like, what is C9 and what are those kind of ramifications that are going on? Because there's people that are, I'll say Christians, that are quite excited if you bring it up. But like I said, I don't think I've heard anything about this in the last few weeks at all. So
I mean, the issue generally, so the Bill C9 is a liberal bill that was introduced, I think, in September, October of last year, called the Combating Hate Act. And what it proposes is a number of changes to the criminal code, specifically the provisions in the criminal code that surround hate crimes. So we currently have Section 3, 18, and 19 of the criminal code that deal with various hate crimes. And they deal with essentially words that incite hate against a specific group and that have been discriminated against, usually historically.
So Eric, that sense, this sounds like a good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it is the purpose behind it, the aim behind it. So to kind of look charitably at what already exists as well as what's being proposed is essentially designed to provide certain groups that have been identified as having been discriminated against, and I mean, specifically in the context of Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, what will often get referenced are Jews. That there has been an increase of at least claimed, if not actual, acts of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic speech, particularly since October 7th, 2023. And so the stated aim behind this is that these proposed changes will help combat anti-Semitism. And so some of the amendments that are being introduced, which I don't think are generally the ones that are being questioned, involve things like the displaying of Nazi symbols, putting up swastikas. That essentially there is a presumption that if someone is doing that it is for the purpose of inciting hate. Now, the bigger questions that have come out of this, well, there are two of them. At least from my perspective. One relates to, and this is more of a procedural one, and again, I never practiced criminal law, but one of the proposed amendments is to remove the Attorney General's approval of any charges being brought again under this. So generally speaking, I mean, all that means essentially is that for criminal proceedings, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of criminal proceedings in Canada are brought by the Crown. They are brought by the state as against an individual. So, you know, if I go and beat you up in the street and I have to face criminal charges for that, like the case is not called Doug Gardam v. Eric Heath. It is the King v. Eric Heath, because in a criminal matter, it is the state is one party and I am the other, because they are seeking to deprive my liberty, presumably through some form of criminal sanction.
That's good clarity.
There are a rare amount of private prosecutions that can exist in Canada under certain circumstances, and essentially the removal of the Attorney General's requirement. So the proposed removal of the Attorney General's overview of any prosecution under these acts. The worry is that will open the door to essentially anyone can then bring a claim that has a lower standard of sort of an evidentiary threshold to bring someone before the courts. Now, that doesn't mean that the court standard changes at the end of the day, that you know, you still have to be proven. If you're going to commit a criminal offense, you have to be proven that you have done so beyond a reasonable doubt. But the concern is more so that any time that access to prosecution is opened up more widely, that it then just opens the door for abuse, because you have more different actors, whether that even is like local police forces, local politicians, you name it. It opens up the door to using prosecution as a weapon, because as anyone who has been acquitted of a crime can tell you, it's still not fun to go through the process of being acquitted of a crime. It's better than being convicted of a crime, especially if you didn't do it. But it is it's a process. I mean, going through a civil lawsuit, which is my area of experience, that's still not fun to be a party in, and the stakes are generally lower because you're not looking at your actual freedom at stake. So that's one of the issues. The other issue, that is the one that I think has probably got more, certainly generated more heat, more comment, is what's called the removal of the good faith religious defense. So currently in Section 319 of the Criminal Code, there is a defense that says that if someone is expressing a good faith opinion on a religious text, or they are engaging in discussion that is based on a religious text, and they're doing so, you know, evidently in good faith. And again, those are still terms that people can argue about, but generally speaking, that serves as a defense to any claim. It's an absolute defense to any prosecution under that act. Now, Bill C-9, as it currently stands, maintains that defense. So when the Liberals introduced it in the fall last year, they did not seek to remove that. The challenge, of course, in this parliamentary moment is that the Liberals do not hold a majority government. They have a minority government. And so for any legislation to pass, they need to have some cooperation with one of the other parties. And so the Bloc Québécois have proposed an amendment to Bill C-9, which would remove that good faith defense. And so that is where the dispute has really, I mean, it was already there, but then when that amendment was being discussed, and there was some reporting back in the, I think, late fall, early winter, that there had been kind of an agreement reached by the parties to actually make that amendment and put it before the House of Commons, that that is where the real, I think, concern arose, because now all of a sudden you have taken away any kind of good faith defense, and that would then, especially combined with the other aspect of it, the removal of the AG approval, would really open the door to just a lot of potential things being criminalized that would have never been thought to have been criminalized before. And so that is where things lie now. When that was reported that this was in the works, I think that's when a lot of the kind of grassroots opposition and again organized opposition from different and in fact from a wide variety of groups have raised concerns about this, not simply religious and faith-based groups. Certainly that's been a part of it, and not just Christians. The Canadian, I think it's the National Council of Canadian Muslims, has issued statements against the Bill C-9 and its amendments. But I mean, secular civil libertarian organizations, trade organizations, and trade union organizations, I think all have kind of come to the recognition or formed the opinion that the infringement that this would represent on freedom of speech is not actually justified by the harm that it professes to save. And so I think because of that, the reason probably that you haven't heard as much on it is that discussion has kind of stalled on it. They'd originally intended to have it for debate in December, and then that debate got shelved, and it's kind of sat on the back burner. Now, the reasons behind that, again, this can lead us into all sorts of speculation as to motivations that we don't know. Could it just be that they're kind of waiting for the heat to die down and then bring it back in? I don't know. But the issue essentially is one of, there are a couple of issues. The first is the sort of broad rights-based issue. Like, does this actually represent a legitimate restriction on freedom of speech rights, on civil rights? And again, like that's not an unfair question to ask. I think oftentimes when we engage in the question of rights being restrained in some way, the automatic assumption is, well, that's bad. Like that's necessarily bad. I don't think it's necessarily bad as a concept, because there are a million different ways in which our rights are restrained on a daily basis.
Like, it is.
You can't build a 1,000-foot radio tower in your backyard without getting some ire from the local government, because you're violating zoning when you do that. Like that is a restriction on your right. Now again, for the most part, none of these restrictions on our rights really affect us in any given day. But if you dug into your backyard and found gold there, well, you don't own the mineral rights to your property. You might think you do, but you don't. And so because of that, there is there are any number of ways where our rights are restricted in ways that we that because the job of government is, to some extent, to balance the individual and the collective good.
Yes.
That we actually have these rights restricted all the time. But so the question becomes, well, is it legitimate? So that's kind of the first question. And many people are taking the position, no, in fact, this doesn't. First off, I mean, it won't solve the problem, in the sense that if we look at and again, people that are paid to do this kind of stuff have written studies on this that basically says that like the good faith defense is not like some magic bullet that bad actors have been using to get out of consequences. It's not like you have neo-Nazi groups that are saying, well, no, in fact, our this is actually coming out of the book of no, that's not being used in that way. It's not being used as some sort of silver bullet to allow hate speech to happen. And so the bigger concern is, will this actually end up then representing a threat to legitimate interpretations of, again, whether that is the Bible, whether that is the Quran in a Muslim setting, whether that is other religious texts, things that, and again, the kind of classic example that will get the most traction is saying that homosexual acts is a sin. Is that hate speech? And that's the question, because that is one that would open the door and an area that is of concern. Like, would this legislation capture that? So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the debate that exists. Now, again, there is sort of a further question that is both that's engaged at this point, but also can be further engaged down the line in the event that this legislation ever passes, which is, does it actually meet constitutional standards? Because, of course, we do have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of expression as a fundamental Canadian civil right. And of course, that question is one that can't really be answered in advance.
Right.
There are certainly, I mean, there are occasional times where the Canadian courts will take a reference question and basically prejudge an issue, like, is this constitutional? But that's exceedingly exceptional in Canadian history. Normally, essentially, what has to happen is a law gets passed, and then someone gets prosecuted, and then the court will then determine, well, in fact, this law actually was overbroad and restricts your constitutional rights in some way. That's a reactive way of approaching the question, though, and it also involves, it means that someone has to get prosecuted for this, yes. and that the law actually has to get passed. So there's a political dynamic to it, a legal dynamic to it, a moral and ethical and civil libertarian dynamic to it that all kind of swirl around into where things are at right now. But I think people are right to engage the question. Like, is this a legitimate restriction on our freedom of expression as Canadian citizens? So that's a legitimate question to ask. And then, I mean, the question that I think Christians especially should be considering is, what happens if this does pass? Let's say, the kind of worst case scenario, this law passes with the amendments, and it goes before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, yeah, this is a legitimate restriction on freedom of speech. In a secular Canadian society, we have no place for these antiquated ideas that don't belong in the public discourse. Then I think it's necessary for Christians to think through, like, what a world would look like in that framework. And not to say that that's likely to happen, not to say that that's necessarily what will happen, but to actually use that as a heart check moment and think, like, what does my faith look like in a setting like that? Because certainly there are places in the world today that have much more restrictions on the expression of Christian faith for usually for different reasons, but then that would represent to the Canadian church. And so it is, I think, something that we have the scriptural promise that the gates of hell will not prevail against the Church of Christ, that the Church of Christ is eternal until he returns and will exist in the new heavens and the new earth in perfect communion with God in the presence of Christ. And so, we don't, as we talked about with the prosperity gospel before, we don't have the promise that everything is going to go smoothly between now and then. And we should know this because the church was founded upon a savior who was crucified on a cross. Things weren't looking so great for Christians when Christianity got off the ground. And so it is a bit of a heart check posture, which is not to say, again, that we should be defeatist. It's not to say that it's kind of an inevitability that social or societal winds will blow against the church. I have no idea. I mean, if you took 2026 and were able to bring a time traveler from 1926 to look at today, they would have no idea, this is would not be able to part. So to say what the future will look like in 100 years, I mean, it's always a bit of a fool's errand. It's always fun to go back and look at old predictions of what the future would look like and see how far off the mark they were, but whether that's technologically, societally, or whatever. But it's important, I think, for us as believers to look and say, like, how would my life change if I was seeking to be faithful in a vastly different context than I currently have, am existing in right now? Because civil liberties and freedom of speech and freedom of expression, I think, are good things. I think these are goods. I think these are gifts of God, but they are not God-given rights.
Okay.
And certainly, I mean, the Apostle Paul did not have those God-given rights. He was in prison for his speech quite a lot.
Numerous times.
And again, that's not to say it's a good thing. Like, I don't want to, but I think we often conflate a right with a good. And certainly, I think in a civil setting, that like in a functioning and flourishing civil society and civil government, then a lot of things that are good should also be right.
Right.
But it doesn't. That again doesn't. We live in a fallen world.
Well, it's when you bring this up, and that's, for me, that's been a great explanation trying to put it all together. Because you have people that get super excited about it, and things are going to end, and many concerned about Christians have been persecuted from the very beginning. We can take that. We won't be able to preach the gospel from the pulpit. All kinds of things that go on, which you're kind of showing, I think, or explaining that those are kind of extreme views. Not that they can't happen, but they're not necessarily necessitating that. The thing that I think is interesting, and it's like, and that's where we started, was this started as a good thing. The concept was to protect people who are being persecuted or hated for things that are outside of their control in many ways, right? And I think as in our moral world, this is why I think that the Christian world is ubiquitous in us, and we don't even know that. But there's that moral part that law is trying to protect people from. There's a moral sense to it.
Right. There is a belief in even in a secular society that there is some external concept of good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think there would be an acknowledgement that is always a shifting, that line is something that's always shifting depending on societal winds. What is societally good today from a secular perspective is different than what was societally good today, or it was societally good from a secular perspective in 1950.
Right, absolutely.
And so, there's a shift. Like, I don't think you can escape. You can't escape objective morality without, or at least the framework of an objective morality, without devolving into anarchy. I don't think, but you can certainly have a subjective objectivity. The rules of the game. Christianity effectively says, in a very kind of crude way, the rules of the game are the same today as they were 3,000 years ago, as they will be 3,000 years in the future.
Right.
And then a secular morality keeps the framework of the rules, but they can move around. And so what is permissive, or what is permitted and what is not permitted in a different moment of time, it'll be different today like it was different in 1950, like it'll be different in 2126.
Well, you can see that in many ways. In, like, for example, BCE replacing BC as an example time. We haven't changed what it represents.
Yeah.
It's still the same
years.
It's the same person, right?
Yeah.
And what happened? And likewise, on December, like, everyone, the lights, the stores, everyone gets together to start to celebrate that birth, right? Even if they don't necessarily know that's what it's about.
Yeah.
It's the date is still the date, right?
Yeah. It is always funny to me to hear when a secular person gets asked about the meaning of Christmas, and the answer will be something like, well, it's about spending time together with your family and doing good in the community and all these things, which don't answer the why question.
Right.
They answer to some degree the what question, but never the why question. And and that's the thing, right? Is that where the secular morality is vacant is in that why question.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the what question can look very much the same, and in fact, there's a lot of overlap between the what. Like a lot of things that are prohibited in Canadian secular civil society would also be prohibited in a world governed by a biblical ethic. There is a lot of overlap. It's certainly less so than it would have been a century ago, but there's still overlap there. But the why question is answered very differently between one of the others, and it's much more of a strain to answer the why question from a secular perspective, because at the end of the day, well, it's because is it majority rule? Is it kind of a general societal vibe? I don't know. There, you can kind of, some people will, I think, there are secular ethicists that have taken up the challenge and will even kind of have a variant of the golden rule, a variant of whether it's like not doing harm to others as our, but even then that leaves vacant the why. Why is it bad to harm someone else? Where are the limits of that harm? Can I swindle someone if I don't physically harm them? Like, where's the boundary there?
Well, this is kind of what shifted my brain on truth.
Yeah.
In the sense that this whole idea of personal truth, and you can take it to the extreme. I think I might have mentioned this before, but if my personal truth is I'm not going to kill people,
yeah,
but someone else's is I am, and it's acceptable.
Yeah.
Who's because I can sit here and judge that, saying, well, mine's just good.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't change the personal truth part of it.
Right.
And when that example was just demonstrated, and that's a fairly simple example to me, but it really exaggerated it in a sense, but in many ways it doesn't. It's like that's the fallacy of having that. Because if you sit around like that and keep those, that gets you down some pretty odd pathways for sure.
And that, I mean, that's like C.S. Lewis's chapter on the natural law in Mere Christianity, right? Where he goes to the point and says there's no society in the world where stabbing your friend in the back is considered a good in some sense, right? Like where betrayal is considered good. And I think that's such a good example to me of how there actually is, like, there is an objective morality that exists within the hearts of all of us that we can accept or we can deny, but it's there.
Yes,
it's like saying that there's a sign here. Well, yeah, there is. I can accept. I can deny that there's a sign there, but it's not going to change the fact that
there is one.
Yeah.
No, and it's interesting how that kind of fits together. So I'm trying to fit all this together today, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, so you're now. And I'm going to use the word established, but if that is uncomfortable for you, but you've been in the pastor world, so you're in Central Abbey. My sense is you're very excited to be in that role. You're where you want to be at this point in time, or where God's even putting you. How does that shift your world, changing frame of reference, from, I'm going to say, 7 years ago?
No.
Around that, because you did the seminary, you did your at Northview for 4, right?
Yeah.
So about 7 years.
It was. 7 years is a good number, because it was 7 years ago next week that I had this call from God on my life to go into ministry.
Okay, so that's
March of 2019. So to date this episode, that was 7 years ago, and so I think a couple of ways. Number one is the degree of, I think, personal investment and connection with the people that I'm interacting with. Because as a lawyer, at the end of the day, there were two, I think, levels of detachment that exist. The first is that you are very much a professional. And as much as we want to view pastors as professional societally, again, going back to John Piper, he has a book, Brothers, We Are Not Professionals. But there's a professional detachment that exists there, where as a lawyer, you kind of, you can have a human connection, certainly, with your clients, but you also, you are standing above them in a certain way. And especially as a litigator, when you go into court, when I go into court, I have an obligation to bow before the judge, and I have an obligation to use certain words and phrases when I'm in there that indicate that I belong there. And so that's kind of, I exist in my world there, and you're kind of a guest in it. I'm helping my world sort of shepherd, for lack of a better word, you through a difficult situation, but you're existing in my world here at this point. So that's one. And the other aspect of it, which you can't underestimate, is that they're also paying me to do my job. They are literally every second that I'm spending doing something for them is costing them money. So that dynamic exists there, which necessitates, I think, a degree of emotional detachment at the end of the day. That I have to have this sort of professional detachment from the person that I'm representing. Not that limits my ability to do that job, but there has to be that detachment there, because at the end of the day, if they stop paying me, I stop being their lawyer. And that is that's there. Yeah. Now, both of those don't exist in the realm of what I'm doing now, in the sense that, like, I when I had that question of what are you doing in 5 years, my answer was, like, if in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, I am the Central Abbotsford campus pastor of Northview Community Church, I will view that as an unmitigated success. That I have been able to be in a place where I have been able to grow with, and of course, people come and people go, but grow with the same group of people for a good solid chunk of both of our lives, and walk alongside them through that time. So there is that personal investment is more there, in that I am, I think, called to help people walk through difficult times, but in a way that just involves more personal engagement. And I mean, the thing is, I'm also, like, as a lawyer, you're called to solve someone's problems. I'm actually not called to solve anyone's problems as their pastor, but I am there to guide them to the one who can give them the framework for understanding their problems. Depending on how you define solve the problem, because like solve the problem, again, we look in very much an earthly sense of how to solve a problem. Like, my problem is that I have like a chronic pain. To solve the problem means to take the chronic pain away. Or does solving the problem mean having a framework to understand why that chronic pain is there, and how I am still able to flourish and enjoy life and enjoy God, notwithstanding the fact that I have chronic pain. So it is, I think, to some degree, there's a different question that's being answered. And then again, just not, again, because I'm not paid by the, like, it's, we don't charge a cover. There's no cover charge to come to Central Abbotsford. that relationship, like, the only thing that can break that relationship down is the thing that could break down any human relationship. Like, if there was some sort of distrust that existed at the end of the day, and I certainly have no desire to foment that in any relationship that exists there. And so, like, it is a theoretically unending relationship as long as our, as long as we're still around here, and we're still there. So I think it also it helps to broaden that perspective, in the sense that, again, as a litigation lawyer, even though lawsuits could spiral on for a couple of years, there's still a discrete component to it. At the end of the day, we're either going to settle this, or you're going to fire me, or I'm going to fire you, or we're going to go to trial and get a decision at the end. But it will be resolved. Like, there's a process that's in place that resolves this, hopefully before one or both of us, is no longer on this earth. Right. Whereas in a pastoral relationship, like, it could be lifelong. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, like, the ones that are the most meaningful, that I've certainly heard tell of, and even, like, as someone who has attended church now for 20 plus years, the connections that I had with pastors that I'm no longer at their church because I moved to a different city or whatever, but like in Vancouver, the first real pastor that I have, like, I texted him a couple of weeks ago because he's got some stuff going on, and just said, hey, we're praying for you. That's cool. And just sort of still have that connection. We were in a small group in their house 20 years ago when their kids were 2 and 4, and now they're young adults and off into the world. And so you can have these long-term connections that I don't think exist. Like, it's a different context. So I mean, to the point of, do I enjoy what I'm doing? I mean, absolutely, for those reasons. Like, it is such a joy to be able to come together with the same group of people. And obviously, again, it shifts from week to week, but there's a core, as you know, of people, of probably absolutely 100 to 125 people that are pretty much there week in, week out, that I'm able to connect with, to see how things are going, to hear about the ups, to hear about the downs, to walk through things. Like, we had one of the families at our church was pulling out of the parking lot a few months ago, and they got hit by a car. And so just even, like, right there, like, they had the paramedic was there, and the fire truck was there, and the pastor was there, and we got all different roles that were being playing in that. But, like, that's the realities of life that you get invited into in this role. That is, I mean, I think it's a sacred responsibility. It's one that I don't take lightly, but I also really, really enjoy the privilege that it is.
So when you said about this, your first pastor that you started to go to church, what was his comment how did he react when you told him that? Because you knew you were a lawyer and studying for a lawyer, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How How did he react when you told him?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because we hadn't connected in quite a while, and then so he still pastors at another church in Vancouver now, and we as a family went out there to just go out on one Sunday to go and say hi, and so yeah, I mean, he was excited by it. I remember when because I was attending his church when I got accepted into law school and started going there, so at the time I would. We were, much like at Central, we were renting a space in the movie theater. So we had to go there and do setup and tear down every week. And I was on the setup team and he'd always be there setting up. And, when I got into law school, he'd always be, referring to me as counselor, you're in this and having some fun with that. So I think it was exciting, I think, for him just to have hear this kind of full circle story happen.
And having witnessed the whole thing, right? Like, that's pretty cool. So I'm going to switch gears completely here, Eric, because we've been down a lot of things. So you're a sportsman. So you just finished a half marathon on the weekend.
This is true.
And is that your first half marathon that you finished?
It is the first half marathon that I finished running.
Oh, okay.
It is so. I mean, I can get into the story if we want.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, good.
So I'm something of an accidental runner. Sportsman is a very, very generous compliment / lie. But you're a goalie. I am a goalie.
Which is the next question.
Yeah. Okay. We did talk about that last time.
Keep going.
So this goes back to 2020. So again, I said I had this. It's tied into my call to ministry somehow, but had this call to ministry in 2019 that led to me applying to the seminary program that we run at Northview, and I was accepted into that. As it happened, I got accepted into that in March of 2020, the Friday before everything shut down for COVID. So I had big plans. I was going to wind up my legal practice at the end of April, and then it was going to have 4 months. I was going to do some original language training in Hebrew and Greek at a local seminary. And then, of course, COVID hit, the world shuts down. So instead, I am now a homeschooler for what was then 3 kids who were in grades 4, 2, and kindergarten. And we had to be creative. I've never been a teacher before. I was a teaching assistant for university students, but that's a little bit different than elementary school. And so we heard a story about a guy in France who ran a marathon on his balcony. It was during lockdown in France. He had a 20-foot balcony. He ran back and forth 1 billion times to make a marathon. And so for a math exercise, I got my children to measure out how many laps of our backyard would be a marathon. So they measured out a course and they learned that it would be 1,386 laps of our backyard. And so my girls, who at the time were 10 and 8, they decided that over the course of that week, it was April, it was a really nice, we had beautiful weather that year, I remember, because I had nothing else to do from going in their backyard. And so they decided they were going to run that many laps that week in the backyard. And so they started doing it for a couple of days. And after 2 or 3 days of them running 200 laps in the backyard, I'm like, you guys are putting me to shame. So I've never been a runner in my life. I tried getting into jogging a couple of times and it would never take. And so I said, well, you guys are like, I got to get out and do this with you guys. You're doing it. You're putting in the effort. I'm going to go out. So I went out and I ran 5 kilometers of laps of our backyard, a 100-foot circle. I did it 150 times and did it one day, and they were doing it the next. So I came out and did it the next day. And for whatever reason, it just kind of stuck with me. So for the rest of 2020, I ran 5 kilometers pretty much, like aside from maybe 3 or 4 days. Wow. I ran every day that year from middle of April onward. And so 2021 came along and I was in good shape because I've been running every day.
Yeah.
So I made a goal that year that I was going to run 2,021 kilometers for the year 2021.
Oh, okay.
That works out to about 5.5 a day. So I started running 6 every day and then kind of modified that goal. And that year, every single day, 365 days, didn't matter. We had the heat dome that year. We had the floods year.
Oh, yeah.
Christmas, birthday, everything like that. I ran.
You ran in that 41 degree.
I think that day I ran at like 5 in the morning when it was only about 25 degrees.
Man.
That was I was not going to go out and do when it was 46 or whatever. But I did run every single day that year. So I made a goal in 2022. We're eventually getting to the point of the story. 2022, I was going to run the Vancouver Marathon. And that's a bit of a different animal. You got to stretch out more than 6 kilometers. So I was starting doing more training, long runs. And as I was working through the pathway to that training, it happened that there was a half marathon in Fort Langley at the end of February.
Oh, man.
And so I went to run that race and I got about 12.5 kilometers into it. And I just felt my left leg entirely seize up on me. And it turned out I had torn a hip flexor muscle in there. But I still finished the race. I did it on one foot. I did the last 9 kilometers hopping in. doing the Terry Fox run with my left leg as a complete passenger. And then I was rehabbing that for the next 5 months. And I'm in my 40s. I had various injuries after that. I finally got back into running kind of wholeheartedly this past fall. And so just even kind of working through the original being out of shape, getting back into better shape, and decided, you know what, I believe in a God of redemption. There's a redemption arc here that is available to me, and you're on. And so last Sunday, right after I watched Canada lose in the gold medal game of hockey, I drove out to Fort Langley and I ran my first half marathon and completed it on 2 feet, man, without injury.
Congrats.
And so
that's very cool.
I'm in the process of still training for Vancouver this year for the full marathon. That's 2 months and a bit away. But yes, Lord willing, I will get that done on 2 feet and then never run another marathon again.
There's a few of us praying for you, just so you know.
You know what? I need it.
So that leads me. You just segued great into the Canada-US final gold medal game. You know, I'm watching the TV and it's like, because I'm out. I've played hockey when I was young, and I still really like the game, but and so we went out to the Abbey Canucks just after Christmas. Laura got us tickets, and we went. And with the size of the players today and the technology that's improved equipment, improved sticks, improved it all, I can't get over how defensive it is. And it's almost like I threw this out. So we're in the last 10 minutes of the third period, right? Exciting, all the things. But I'm going like, there's days I wonder, why don't they just take the 5 players and the goalie and put them in front of the net and just leave them there? Like, because you're not going to get a goal past them. They block the full net. And it kind of occurred to me as I'm watching this, because you're a goalie, I'm a goalie. I'm from the vintage with the Jerry Cheevers, the Ken Drydens, the Tony Espositos, and the flinging split save with the gloves. And I miss that a lot in hockey. But I also miss the slap shots.
Yeah.
Because there's no slap shots anymore. Because it's too fast. So we go into overtime. And I've not seen this 3-on-3 before. Eric, I got real excited. It was fun to watch. And how skillful these guys are. And how fast they are. And I'm going, and then it ended in like, 25 seconds?
A minute and a half or something like that. Yeah.
And I thought, wouldn't it be neat to see the configuration not go to 3? Let's go to 4. 4-on-4, and see what happens. And so I started to throw it out on X, because I thought, like, I do find it not as exciting to watch with like the goalies flinging themselves in these slap shots, because slap shots are kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that 3-on-3, but you also start to see like how fast these guys are.
Yeah.
Because now they've got more room to move, right?
Yeah.
So my comment to you is, what do you think of that?
So here's the crazy idea that I had related to that probably 10 years ago.
You're way ahead of me.
That you would have to, there would certainly have to be a number of rule changes to make this happen. But would be that a team had to have one player outside of their own blue line at all times. So when you're defending,
you're still 5-on-5.
Still 5-on-5.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the way that there's illegal defense in basketball, or there's 3 in the key, these violations. You must have one of your own players outside of your own blue line at all times. You can only have 4 of your own defenders
in your end.
Okay. At all times. And to me, I mean, there's of course coaching.
That's interesting.
Coaching will approach all these things in different ways.
Oh, absolutely.
But that means you've got a guy cherry picking at all times.
Yes.
Because he's out in the neutral zone, presumably. But it opens up some strategy. Does the other team then basically press and get 5 guys in and have it be a power play, but knowing that if they miss a pass or it comes out, then that guy's got to break away going
absolutely.
I don't know. It could. I mean, it's one of those things where there's probably a million other factors that go into it. But that was one thing that I thought about.
No, that's and that would open the game up in the end.
Right? It might, until coaches though they devise strategies to clamp it down. Like even having watched 3-on-3 overtime in the NHL for the last 10 or 12 years, however long it's been in there for now, they've got different strategies for it now too, where it's when you don't have the 6 best players in the world against each other at all times, where they find ways to slow it down too. So
Well, I just, like I said, I know NBA and NHL viewership is down, quite a bit down from the 90s.
Yeah.
And I know when I watch it, that's part of the thing that I struggle with now is I do find it boring because like a goalie doesn't do that stuff anymore. Their pads are gigantic.
Well, there's still men's league hockey. If you want to see high scoring, just come out and watch any game that I'm playing.
But I thought like Formula One has changed enormously over the years to change their rules. And when they first started shifting them, people like the purists didn't really like it. It's more popular than I think ever. And I think it's time that the NHL start to consider some of this stuff because they're not going to get smaller, right? Like the last draft they had, they draft all the defensemen were 6 foot plus.
Yeah.
Like, because when you're an athlete, no matter what size you are, you're training more and more than ever, right?
Yeah.
So they're not going to get smaller.
Yeah.
Tech is not going to make equipment slower, right? Your skates are just going to get better and better. And it's like, how are you going to be able to take like those 5 giants, 6 on each side giants, and put them together?
You know, I'm 6'2". I used to be a tall goaltender, and you look at the NHL.
You're small now.
I'm the goalie for the Canucks last night, I think, is 6'6", and that's kind of average. So,
but you think though, like that's the concept, right?
Yeah.
Like when I went the Abbey Canucks game, like I'm going, like when I grew up, it was like, and playing hockey, you were never on your knees.
Yeah.
They sit on their knees the whole time.
And they're still taller than the net.
And I'm kind of going like, okay, so the concept here is just to block the net.
Yep.
It's not like to make saves, so to speak.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm being harsh, I don't know, but I'm just kind of looking at it from the outside because I want to watch hockey, but I just find it so hard to watch because you don't even. I think Bobby Orr said it in his book, so you know the vintage I'm talking about. But he said, I could not be noticed in today's hockey world. Now, this is 20 years ago, but and he said, because I was allowed to be creative in ways that you're not allowed to be creative anymore.
Well, they're just going to have to start listening to us, I guess.
Anyway, Eric, I've taken a bunch of your time today. This has been just truly another great conversation. There's lots of stuff to still go, but I was going to say we probably should kind of, as Mark likes to say, land this thing.
Well, so I'll bother you in another year to come back on a third time.
So just to kind of wrap things up, is there anything that you would like to kind of add that you haven't added yet, or you haven't said that it's just like, okay, this would be appropriate to put in here before we kind of just wrap it all up?
I mean, I guess I would say if there's anyone out there, I don't know the extent of your audience, but for those that are local, those that are Northview people that are heard of you, going back to what we were talking about earlier, dive into one of our Bible studies.
Oh,
be
yeah,
a part of it. We're going to get more guys out there, especially because it's something that we need that to be priorities in our life. Like if we, even in the concept what we were talking about yesterday at Bible study, if we want to see positive changes, we can't necessarily make them happen, but also if there is going to be, insofar as cultural shifts kind of impact the way society operates, it only happens when people are active and a part of it. And if we want to see the church be strong, the church be influential, and actually have a voice that is considered valid within society, even if people don't always agree with us, we need more and more people to be involved, to be knowing what the Bible says, and to be living lives that seek to honor God in all things. So,
I think it's a great one, partly because I think it starts where we started off, and you asked him to come back on the podcast. It's one of those things. When I first went to Bible study, I walk into a room that I expected to see 30 men in, not 200. I was super intimidated, but it was kind of that, like, it was better than not doing it now, and what it's kind of flourished into. In fact, last night was really cool, going back to Spurgeon, when Martin said, Bible reading and prayer, Spurgeon said, was like breathing in and breathing out. Now that you can remember. I thought that was great.
That was good.
Anyway, Eric, wonderful having you back here. I hope you've enjoyed this episode again with Eric. I was going to say, it's you can reach Eric at Northview if you have any questions for him about what he even talked about around the C9 bill. But and maybe even add to the hockey question. Who knows? Maybe we could get something going with it. Could change the way we look at hockey. Anyway, with that, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel, Better Than Not. And for that, and for next time, tune in. We'll talk to you. Bye now.
Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.